Hello, Facebook. So we're now live on Facebook and on Instagram. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Just let Facebook get started. And cheers, Ant. I thought I'd be better prepared as well, but the medium of children gave way for that one. Um, we're going to get started now. I've got various questions that have been sent in, and then at the end as well, I'll try and go through comments on both Instagram and Facebook, and then we can go from there really. And hopefully everybody will have a good event. And as I said, any questions, fire them over at the end, and we'll go through everything, and hopefully I'll be able to answer them. So the first question that I've got is, what advice would you give to a farrier with less than a year's experience? Now, being in the UK, we'll have already done, well, to be a farrier in the UK, you have to do a 4-year and 2-month apprenticeship. So that is a fairly, it's a fairly arduous process. You then have to pass your diploma afterwards. So when you go out on your own, you should be fully set to be able to safely shoe horses. Now, I would recommend to everybody, even after they've done that, to do a year, possibly longer, with another farrier or a selection of farriers, so that you can learn the trade, continue to make mistakes, but have somebody there to fix it. Now, if you're in most other countries in the world, you don't have to legally do an apprenticeship. But I would still recommend that you did one. I'd recommend that you found somebody to work with that's going to help you, that's going to be there to support you and let you do stuff. But also, at the end of the day, you can work on their horses with them. And the part of that parcel is that you can make mistakes, but they're there to fix those mistakes. So that's always that's what I'd recommend, is just get out there, get under horses, but with somebody that's competent and good at their job and is happy to have you there, and will help you learn. It's all about learning. There's too much in this trade to not learn it, and everybody's still learning even at the end of their career. So that's what I'd say. Get involved with another farrier, get involved with your farrier associations, and don't go it alone, because that's where you'll get stuck, and that's where you get wrong, and you will always need a mentor. Question number 2. How many horses do I shoe a month? Varies. I try and do, if I'm on my own, 5 sets a day, 5 days a week, with a few trims thrown in. Some days that might be more, some days that might be less. If I've got somebody with me, then we'll probably do about 8 sets a day. But again, that does depend on what's going on. If it's a complicated day, I might only do 3 sets. If I've got a day of using a lot of bar shoes and pads and packings, then I'll do a lot less work. And if it's a day where actually I'm driving halfway around the world to consult on a case, then again I'll do a lot less work. But on average, it's about 5 sets a day, 5 days a week, 48 weeks of the year. So I know that's not monthly, but that kind of adds it all up really. Do I get a bad back? Yes, but I regularly see a chiro and a physio. And have a massage on a very regular basis, because actually my back is the most important part of my body. It's what does all my job, my back and my hands. And most farriers, if you look at their hands, they'll be pretty manky. I have got some very sexy blue nail varnish on at the moment that hasn't come off yet, courtesy of my eldest daughter. Apparently myself, mummy and her all need to look together. So it's not just horses' feet that get polished, it's slightly crumpled farriers' hands as well. But your body is the most important thing that we have. So it's it is important. Get a sports massage, Anthony Somerville, for your information. And then yeah, my chiro as well. She also does horses, so that's quite convenient because we get to have a good chat about caseloads that we share, whilst my back's being cracked into place in a satisfying sounding way. So it's a nice, I see somebody monthly. Other people are different. If you're 5 foot nothing and you shoe horses, you probably will never need to see anybody for your back in your life. But if you are 5'11" or 6 foot and over, then you'll probably have to see somebody on a fairly regular basis. The next question: is there any way of fixing underrun and contracted heels without removing the shoes? And this also leads on to the question after that, which is, can you discuss the benefits of barefoot versus shod? So let's start with the first question. Is there a way of fixing underrun and contracted heels without removing the shoes? And the answer to that is yes. Normally, what you find is that this type of foot conformation is caused by a long toe, low heel, which is generally caused either by conformation of the whole horse, but by that foot growing too much toe and not enough heel. And then over time what happens is the back of that foot gets compressed, which means that it's only got one way to go, which is in. And so actually you get a longer toe and then a shorter contracted heel. Now, the most important part of that is the trimming. To be fair, the most important part of any shoeing is the trimming. That is key, and that is what we aim to do on every horse that any farrier trims, is a level, balanced trim, leaving enough foot to compensate for the job that it's doing. In this case, we're talking about a horse that will grow a lot of toe and not a lot of heel. So with horses like this, it's important to keep the trim cycle as short as you feasibly can to alleviate that extra pressure that's put on the back of the foot. So for me, I shoe on a 5-week rotation, which for most horses in my care gives me the benefit of keeping on top of their feet all the way through the year, regardless of if it's summer or winter, with various caseloads being on a 4-week location and some performance horses being on a 4-week rotation as well, because actually what you find with those is that if you can adjust minimal feet at once, then you will get a quicker result for what you're doing. Now with this pathology and conformation of that long toe, low heel, contracted heel, you can also find that by adding a pad and packing underneath. So I really like the Diplano pads. I'm not sponsored by them at all, but I really like those, and they seem to work really well with either a sole pack, which is this material and it comes out in a squeezy tube, or a dental impression material, which is this material, and that's a bit bouncier, but it has slightly different properties, and that depends on the hoof and depends on the horse in question. Depends on really what type of packing we're using and whether they can cope with the harder packing, so the soft pouring packing, or whether they can only cope with a softer packing, which is where we go for the dental impression material, or something like a magic cushion, which is a eucalyptus based product that you pack into the feet and you put hemp on top. And I haven't got it out of the van because it's incredibly sticky, but that can work really well as well, depending on what you need and what that horse can cope with. Giving support to the heels is really important as well. If you fit the foot penny on a penny, so you're fitting to the heel, you are never going to give that foot enough support over a longer cycle than if you are fitting it with some width to those heels and some length to the back of the foot to compensate for that. Now, if it's a hunter on a 3-week rotation, for example, because it burns through its shoes and it's doing a lot of hunting work, then actually some of the strongest feet that you see are hunt horses, because they get shod so regularly, but you're not removing a lot of horse. It is all together, because you're not removing that foot. You're quite often bolting the nails up the old nail holes, so you're not creating any new nail holes, and you're putting a thinner section on it, but it's creating a stronger wall. But going back to the original question, yes, you can. Fit was trim, keep your cycle shorter, so a 4 to 5 week cycle. Fit with support, and potentially add a pad and packing in there to achieve results a bit quicker. Now, we're on to the favourite question of the moment that seems to rear its head on a very regular basis. Can you discuss barefoot versus shod? In my humble opinion, it's completely up to your horse what it needs. So today I took shoes off a horse because it came in and it's now on field rest, and actually she's not going to do anything with it for a few months, and although it's injured, it doesn't need shoes on to support its injury, and it was fine. And we took it barefoot, and actually it might take a week or so to adjust to the fact that it's barefoot, but it's living out in a muddy paddock doing nothing. I've got cobs that I shoe that are amazingly barefoot. I've got thoroughbreds that I shoe that do amazingly barefoot. On the flip side, I've got cobs that I shoe that hate being barefoot, and I've got the thoroughbreds that I shoe that would be crippled if you took their shoes off. And again, it is down to pathology. So we shoe horses for 3 main reasons, and they are protection, support, and grip. So the protection is, you protect your trim. Your trim is the basis for any form of shoeing that we do, and any form of trimming that we do, it's your trim. So you find that you have to protect that. Now, for support, what happens is if you've got a limb deviation or you've got a foot deviation, you can help that. If you can't help that enough in your trimming, you can help that with your shoeing. So, for example, you could put a whopping great big lateral extension on it, which would help that limb and help that support when that limb loads over the top of it, because there's nothing here in the foot. The foot on this shoe finishes about there. That there is supporting the hock above it, which is quite important when it comes to horses and keeping horses sound and horses performing at a high level. So yeah, essentially it doesn't matter if your horse is barefoot or your horse is shod. It's as long as your horse is happy and it can do the job that it does. We've shod horses for thousands of years, regardless if it's composite shoeing or if it's using steel or aluminium, or if your horse is sore when it's out ridden and it's barefoot, you can always use a boot. Boots are quite useful for that. There are ways of obviously managing your barefoot horses, and there are ways of managing your shod horses. It shouldn't be an argument like we quite often find on Facebook and Instagram, and it shouldn't be as emotive as it is. It should just be, is your horse happy in the way that it is, and is it comfortable, and is it sound? Tim asks, are boots like shoes then? Like shoes that we wear, yes, because actually you strap them on and you take them off again. What you can't do with a boot is you can't leave it on for a prolonged period of time. So actually a boot doesn't necessarily, unless you adapt it and modify it, which I haven't got any experience of doing, you can't help the conformation of a horse with a boot, but you can help them. And I know that various people around the world use the soft ride boots to help horses, and especially with laminitis, and I know that they've had some great results with those. I haven't myself. It's not my go-to, but a lot of other people have done, so it's something that's worth considering. Next question on the list. This person uses Red Horse Soul Cleanse for thrush protection. Is there an optimum number of times to use it in a week? Not really, to be honest with you. I like the Red Horse product range. I think it does a great job at helping out horses. I think with all horses, the more on top of their hoof care you get, the better their hooves are going to be. Um, if you pick your horse's feet out on a daily basis, or on a daily basis, or a bi-daily, or twice a day, then you are going to always see the pros and the cons and what's going on with their feet. And then by putting a topical agent on top to help them out and kill any thrush, like your Red Horse products or your anti-backs that are out there, or your White's Hoof Care. There's lots of different products out there, but whatever you're using, there's nothing wrong unless it's something as corrosive as hydrogen peroxide or copper sulfate, and you're not using that to help the horses. Then you you are using that to help the horses, but if you're using that on a daily basis, it will degrade that foot, and it's not a great thing to use unless you've got something like a really bad thrush infection. But if it's just a normal case of foot care, a little bit of thrush, you're better off using the Red Horse products or something similar to that, which then can address that but also not take out the good bacteria that is within those feet. So I think I can go. No, there's not an optimum time. I'd say if it's thrushy, use it every day. If it's not, then kind of do it a couple of times a week and go from there. What is the most frequent cause of deep digital flexor tendon strain? What is the most frequent cause of DDF tears? So, your deep digital flexor tendon runs down the back of the foot and is part of the two flexor tendons at the back of the foot, and then connects to the foot within the tendinous surface of the back of the foot, essentially. And what it does is it allows that foot to be pulled up. And I've got a video on it actually in my previously. I think I put it up late last night. But it essentially holds the foot together with the common digital extensor tendon, which is at the front. I haven't read any research on the most frequent causes, but like all tendon injuries, jumping and working at speed, poor conformation and poor foot balance are the main causes for a lot of tendon injuries and tendon tears. Fixing them can be a bit of a problem, and a lot of the time it is down to veterinary intervention, although we can help with shoeing, but it does depend on where the tear is and what's going on, and etc. etc. But mainly caused by working at speed, jumping high jumps, poor conformation and poor foot conformation. And again, that goes back to our quick discussion earlier about keeping feet on a regular shoeing cycle. If you're going over 6 weeks, then that's probably too long for a normal horse. It might be alright for yours, but as I said, most of mine are shod in a 5-week rotation so that we can keep on top of them. So I will look into that a bit more, and hopefully I'll be able to give you a bit more of an answer on a later date. And the last question on here, and then I'll go through the comments, is: are there any hoof-related red flags when buying a horse? Yes, to be honest with you. Long toes, broken back heels. If it's got bar shoes on, pads and packing, and they're not willing to discuss with you why it's got bar shoes on or pads and packing. A lot of my horses are in bar shoes and pads and packing for various reasons, be it performance related or injury related, and actually those clients, if they're selling the horse, will tell the owner why it's got the bars on and everything like that, and then we can have a discussion with it, because quite often that, again, as we said earlier, is linked to conformation. Conformation is probably more of a red flag than foot problems. If it's got a limb that's going on the wonk like that, then that's a bit of a red flag, you know, and that is going to cause foot problems. Most foot problems don't manifest itself directly from the feet. A lot of the time they're caused by what's going higher up and then moving down to the foot, and the foot is quite often a secondary problem caused by something that's going on higher up. So for those that are wondering why my nails are blue and weren't at the start of the live stream, it's because my daughter decided it was a great idea to paint them, and it's gradually wearing off because I'm not allowed to remove it apparently, and they'll probably be repainted at the weekend. That was a digress, but yeah, so hoof-related red flags, yeah, if it's got, again, if it has got a broken back hoof pattern access, or it's got a club foot, or it's got really contracted heels, then actually that might be something that you need to consider and send some photos to your farrier to have a look at. If it's got a massive crack in the foot, then that is also something to consider, you know, because that's going to take a bit of work potentially to help and to bring back and to get that foot on a more even keel. So yeah, those would be foot problems. Those would be my main thing. If it's got cracks and splits in it, why is that? If it's got long toes, low weak heels, if it's got a club foot, that's again another, for me, would be another red flag, because then you've got a bit of limb length disparity as well. And sometimes these things, although they can be helped, they might not necessarily be able to be fixed, because actually what you've got is you've got a limited time when that horse is young to fix these problems. So if it's a yearling and it's got a club foot, then, and it's had it all its life, then you're probably not going to fix that. You're going to have to manage it. But if it's an older horse and it's developed a club foot, then that might be fixable, because actually what you're then doing is you'll probably have a compensatory issue on the other foot, and you're helping both of those at the same time. So that's the end of the questions that I've got. I've just got a couple on Facebook. So Mitchell Wood says, have you any way of working out how much sole and hoof wall you can remove from the toe area before applying a shoe, especially when they have retained sole? Not from a it sounds really stupid, but it's not something. I'll try and do a post on it, to be honest with you, because it's not something I can explain without having a hoof in front of me. Now, a lot of it is experience, and a lot of it is by feel. So what I'm doing, well, what any farrier is doing when they approach a foot or a horse, is you look at the whole conformation of the horse to start with, and then you work your way down to the foot. You watch it walk, you watch it trot up, and from that you build a picture of what's going on. Somebody, Craighurst92 on Instagram, says changing the pigmentation of the horn tubes. Yeah, that is actually a really good way of doing it. For me, I do a lot of it on feel, and I find as well that by getting down to my point and apex of frog with my solar trim, then I can determine my sole height. If it's a foot that, if we haven't got x-rays for it and it looks like it's a foot that has a very thin sole, then I'll be using my thumbs to determine thumb pressure, and I'll probably go over it with hoof testers before I start trimming to help to just determine where we are. But as a general rule, I eyeball it, and through experience of having shot a lot of horses over the years, you can tell that that's a retained sole or it's not a retained sole. If you're worried about trimming it and you think that it might have less of a retained sole than it actually has, then there's nothing wrong with leaving a bit more hoof on and telling them, actually, I want to reassess this horse in a shorter period of time, because you want to know how this foot's growing. And actually, if you go back to it and it's grown about that much foot, then you know that there's something in there that's going on, like a retained sole or something like that. Or it just needs to be on a shorter tooting cycle. But I'll try and do a post on the retained sole the next time I find one, because it's important to visually see the difference between a retained sole and not a retained sole, and it's also important because then important to see how it feels and see how that hoof flexes and performs. And actually, a lot of it as well is there's a notch in your heel area that, again, I'll take some photos of hopefully tomorrow if it's not hammering it down, that I tend to trim to get my feet to where I want them to be, and it's visually there and you can see it in most feet. So actually, if you know that notch is there and you haven't quite reached it yet and you haven't got any form of flexation in the sole from your hands, then you've probably got a bit more sole in there. Yeah, Craighurst 92 on Instagram, another valid point. If you're worried, start at the white line and work in, as that way, if you do have a hiccup, it won't be as bad. Yeah, I completely agree with that. That's great advice. Georgie Jones on Facebook. It seems the more horses used to have their shoes off for winter, why not as much in work? Do you think that this could be beneficial? 100%. I think that, and I am probably part of the problem because I shoe a lot of competition horses. But what used to happen back in the day, before I was involved in horses, was that horses had a job. And that job might be that it's a hunt horse, or it might be that it's an eventer. And the eventers evented during the eventing season and had August off because, the ground's hard. And then they went back in September, might have done a little bit of in October, and then had their shoes off, turfed out for 6 months, and then brought back in and slowly brought back into work. The hunters did exactly the opposite. They hunted through the hunt season and then had their shoes taken off, and then turfed back out. And actually you find that through a bit of a prolonged period of time of rest and relaxation, those feet will change, and quite often those feet will change for the better if they're barefoot. However, like we said earlier, with barefoot comes pros and cons, and actually for some horses, if they can't cope barefoot for the reasons that we said earlier, which are that they need a bit more protection, or they need a bit more support to help their limb and conformation, or they need grip for their job, then potentially they can't be turfed out without shoes on. Now, what you have now, though, is that evening, Ryan. It's good to see you. Thank you very much for turning up. What you have now is that horses have multiple jobs and multiple things are expected of them. And high performance horses, there's events going on now throughout the calendar year. So you'll have dressage horses that will be competing all year, and they'll be going to different countries all year round to compete, which takes a massive strain on their body, which is why we use shoes like this and like a heart bar and pads and different forms of packing, because actually these horses need as much of a support as we can give them to help their feet and to help them. A lot of horses would be beneficial to have their shoes off, but in the way the world that horses are in nowadays, they can't, a lot of the time they can't compete without their shoes off because of the, as we said, conformation and issues, and surface interaction is now a massive thing as well. And also how they're kept and how they live on a regular basis. But if all horses could be turned out for 6 months a year, then that would be great. But sadly they can't, and we have more pathological problems probably now than we did, certainly 20 years ago from every farrier onto the world that I've spoken to that has been more in this game for a lot longer than I have been. But then we also know more about injuries than we did 20 years ago. There are tendons and ligaments, or not tendons and ligaments, but ligaments within the foot, like your chondrocompedal, your chondroangular ligaments, that weren't discovered until relatively recently. So, yeah, that's the answer to that one. Is that it would be better off if they could be turfed out for 6 months of the year, but sadly, a lot of them and the work that they're doing and the lives that they live, it just isn't a feasible option for. Has anybody got any more questions before we sign off? I haven't seen. I'll just scroll back through Instagram and have a quick look and see if I've missed any. That's not a problem, Georgia. Not a problem at all. I'm glad that you could make it. No, it doesn't look like it. If I've missed anybody, feel free to comment on a post at some point or send me a DM, and I'll see if I can answer them at a later date. Thank you very much, everybody, for turning up. I will be doing some more live streams, going maybe before Christmas, but I've got various projects on the go at the moment, and it would be to share with everybody. I've got some Farrier specific things that I'm going to hopefully get out there, and I've got some general owner related horse care bits and bobs as well. So Matthew Strawson, WCF Honours, are you this good looking? I am, my friend, I am. Thank you very much, as I said, for everybody. I will save these and I will probably post them up at a later date. I'll try and save them anyway. And any questions, feel free to DM me or make a comment on a post, and I'll get through them as quickly as I can. Cheers, guys. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.